All right, we are here with George Hamilton, the star of La Cage aux Folles, which is...
He once
Elizabeth Taylor, whom I previously dated, slept in the George. You made millions in the White House. Hamilton can hardly pay for his medical care. The screen legend Bill at 85 just received sadly. The cancer has returned. His wealth has vanished, and the mansion he must be sold after being occupied for decades. Dating the daughter of the president to this is the terrible struggle for survival. In the end, no one anticipated George Hamilton. Was born in 1939 in Memphis, Tennessee. His father led a well-known band from the North, while his mother came from the South. Belle from Arkansas was a combination of large Southern charm and urban flair that would later mold George's entire persona as a child. He was always on the go. Because of his father's musical career at such a young age, he developed a taste for glitz through travel, yet made him flexible as well. He wasn't either the youngest or the oldest, but in the midst child in a complicated household altered in 1944. George's father had an affair with his band singer, and the marriage ended poorly, leaving his mother to raise the children alone throughout the conflict. The breakup wasn't until George was 5 years old. Merely sentimental, it would permeate throughout his life. His father, after departing the family, quit and relocated to New York. He died young while performing music to sell perfume. George's childhood in 1957 swiftly changed from music and opulent hotels to survival following the divorce. George and his in Blytheville, Arkansas, brothers relocated. Should spend some time living with their grandparents after a little period of tranquility, he eventually having a secure household with which he grew close. His grandparents, and received a fair amount of that courteous upbringing in the South that would never leave him. But in 1947 both grandparents passed away in that same manner. His final semblance of stability disappeared. Mom had no money and no support left, and had 3 boys to look after. Desperate and lacking alternatives, so if a coin toss were to occur, they would relocate to they would try their luck in York Stories. Hollywood was the destination. That a single flip of the coin altered everything. George packed things and departed for California. Was only 8 years old, but Hollywood already felt as though the road was still a calling. Wasn't easy. By 1950, they had relocated once more. George, this time to the East Coast, hopped from one school to another before landing in the Gulf Coast Military Academy, Mississippi, that was influenced by military school. He learned discipline, posture from it. Charm, all of which he would be recognized for later. He was visible not only for his poise and manners, but behind the gleaming exterior of his personal life was still dark, and he continued to deal with the skewed connection with his stepmother, which began prior to him ever reached his teens, but it was kept a secret, retained for many years. At 19, in 1958, when George landed the screen, everything changed. Test with MGM, he lacked official training as merely an acting award from high school and unadulterated charm. He was not wealthy. Barely making ends meet, yet managed to land an agent who thought he was attractive. Therefore MGM gave him a shot. He received $5,000 for a part in Crime and Punishment in the USA was minimal, and even the directors didn't want him. Anthony Perkins was their favorite, although they remained with George, who was taken aback. He performed for everyone, thus intense enough to astound critics. He depicted a law student murdering a pawn broker and somehow becomes plagued by guilt. George created a persona who was both icy, and that role of vulnerability earned him the golden, the most promising newbie in the globe even received a nomination for BAFTA, but he was still not taken by Hollywood. He really needed to buy someone off with a Jack Daniels bottle in exchange for a television appearance, which demonstrates how erratic the in business. You are the next big thing one day. Then you're pleading for a job. At this point, he made another audacious. He began tanning deeply rich, and it wasn't vanity. It was permanent. George wanted his logo to be distinctive, and the tan made the town full of attractive males. He was immediately recognizable, and shortly it became his signature. Along with actor John Derek, even engaged in a light-hearted competition over George turned his head to see who could get darker skin tone as a component of who he was. Laugh about it, take it, and make use of it to stay important even when he is performing. Dried up and arrived at the location where the boys are. George portrayed a charming, wealthy college in 1960. The movie was well cut and a huge hit. Ideal timing for a romantic and transforming America. As the first book including political themes, the film left everything George believed it to be. A light, ridiculous movie, but viewers adored it. Even created one of its most famous improvs, writing a question mark in the scenery, that little sand next to his co-star. His status as a heartthrob was secured at that moment. The picture subtly represented significant cultural alterations, demonstrating how romantic and sexual changing across decades in American life. Subsequent scholars highlighted George's contribution as a component of a larger discussion regarding pop culture and gender courting. In 1965, his portrayal of Hank Williams captured the focus of the most influential. The Johnsons are an American family. That is how he ended himself at the White House. He met Linda Bird Johnson at dinner. The daughter of the president was bookish. He was presidential royalty, silent, Hollywood produced, aggressive, and polished, but in some way, they clicked. George subsequently stated he was aware of the wild side. Their affection is concealed beneath her serene exterior. Swiftly gained national attention. They traveled and appeared on red carpets. Easter was celebrated at the LBJ at Acapulco property, and even took center stage at Bob Hope remarked at the Academy Awards that a watch wasn't necessary for her because she had a Hamilton previously. But not all was grinning behind the scenes. President, it was completely disliked by Lyndon B. Johnson. He wasn't only untrusting of George. Concerned about dating a Hollywood star, he was skeptical about his daughter on a completely different level. Thus he did what? Never should a father order an FBI inquiry. But this wasn't merely this was a personal background check. The president consulted the Supreme Court, FBI Chief J. Edgar and Justice Abe Forrest. Hoover will examine George's life in great detail. They were curious in everything about his friends, family, credit cards, and even rumors regarding George's sexual orientation. The fact that his brother was gay made him dread the worst throughout such time period. Simply the hint of homosexuality would destroy a career. The FBI continued to find nothing harmful appeared, but they continued, and then the most peculiar moment was a surprise. The president's ranch hunting expedition. George received a White House call. Without a doubt, he was expected in Texas. Johnson took him straight after landing, gave him a rifle, and led him into the forest. A look that told him, this wasn't about deer. George needed to act quickly. Fired the rifle, played along, and even finally, President Johnson was impressed. Grinned and referred to him as a normal. Daniel says he's like a frontiersman. Daniel Boone. But George was fully aware of this wasn't hunting. What was happening was a test of masculinity, a measure of in the meantime, loyalty is a test of control. His draft was boiling for another storm. George had stayed out of the military service by asserting that he backed his brothers and mother, but reporters, and after all his efforts, officials detected a lie. Mom lived in Beverly like a king or queen. The president is already upset about Hills. This was deemed improper in Vietnam if George intended to go out with his daughter. Could not be evading the draft as well. Although Johnson didn't state it directly, it was a clear message: either join the battle or leave my family, because the pressure got to be excessively. The romance ended late. However, the twist is that George didn't. When Linda married Marine, she burned bridges. Charles Robb, the captain, and George attended the wedding in 1967. Smiling when posing for pictures like this was merely another film premiere that he stayed in contact with the pair throughout the years after Robb was appointed governor of. After being invited, Virginia, George subsequently acknowledged in his autobiography that he examined the ceremony and pondered, "That might been me." By 2012, a long time after the Robbs went to see the faded headlines, George's theatrical performance in Washington, D.C., they even invited him to join them for supper. Although decades had gone by, the connection never completely vanished. George Hamilton never rose to become the son-in-law of the president. However, there was a brief, bizarre period in that he was closer than any Hollywood star in the 1960s. By the late 1970s, the actor had Hollywood's attention on George has darkened, followed by an odd yet brilliant. Notably, he portrayed Count Dracula in 1979. Love at First Bite is a comedy. There were high expectations, but Hamilton didn't only play it, he also contributed to its creation. And the movie turned out to be unexpected. Hit rather than taking it seriously, he leaned into the ridiculousness of his Dracula, laughed at jokes, and danced to disco. Adored it when he was unexpectedly seen by Hollywood. In a different way than just as a good-looking actor, but as someone with a keen sense of humor, and the film's actual business acumen, money, and it restored Hamilton's significance. The same audacity appeared in his in 1972. Hamilton's personal life also got in a manner that sounded like he was hanging out when he saw a movie scene with Elvis Presley's Colonel Tom Parker manager. When Alana, his girlfriend, Collins, came by to retrieve her belongings, she was going to take a plane back to England. Parker abruptly proposed that they simply that day, and they got married. Elvis's suite with his private airplane with a small puppy and a judge waiting replacing the maid of honor. They even had time to play a game of roulette. Hamilton was defeated. $15,000, but returned home with his spouse. The romance had begun years before in Acapulco, where they were unable to tolerate one another, but in the range of a pinch and a whirlwind romance that ended with a slap 2 years later into something more. Ashley, their son, was born for someone. Hamilton became well known as a playboy and fatherhood in an unexpectedly realistic manner, in which he filmed Medusa in Greece transformed the work into a honeymoon with the family. Later on, Ashley would mature and turn into an actor himself, making appearances in movies such as Iron Man 3 and Beethoven 2. Even following their divorce, Alana and George continued to raise him alongside. George was more than just a good father. He also developed strong relationships with his own son. Later, with Alana's children from her Rod Stewart's marriage was in strange family, yet it managed to work. Most divorces in Hollywood are chilly, or theirs wasn't. George and Alana's, it was chaotic. Divided in 1975, but never truly let each go other. They continued to be closest friends. Conversed during their daily dinners. Alana and George drove together since George was they made jokes about being late all the time. Getting remarried without having to their possessions were superior to most. George once acknowledged that marriages he would catch himself after the divorce. Missing something, then realizing it was her. They were no longer a couple into a more profound relationship. Alana said it best, "I've got his back. And I'm aware that he is mine." So there was for George Hamilton. It's all just another storm. Began in 1979, when George Hamilton traveled to the Philippines in order to advertise his Love at First Bite, a vampire comedy at the time. It was his greatest moment. Career, he was surprised to discover a lunch invitation at the presidential palace in which he would see the nation's the unmarried First Lady, Imelda Marcos. Lunch became a world-spanning friendship full with secrets and glitz, and ultimately, scandal. Imelda was immediately enchanted by Hamilton, and their relationship deepened together. They swiftly traversed the globe, shopped together, and even performed music in private. But what appeared to be a celebrity friendship was quickly made public. That year, something much darker. Hamilton also got to know two members of Alda's Antonio Florendo's close inner circle of prosperous businessmen who amassed a fortune through agreements with the Marcos administration, and the best friend of glitzy Tantico Alda, and these weren't personal shopping agents. They played significant, but only as background figures. Parts in the eventual trail of covert transactions, dubious loans, and millions of dollars that ultimately passed in 1982 via Hamilton's hands. Hamilton obtained a loan of $600,000 from he said that it was to mortgage his plantation in Mississippi, but the timing questioned why it arrived after only 2 months. Upon his attendance at the ostentatious Manila movie celebration at which attendees drank $100 French later had roasted cows and champagne. Investigators found something quite even more concerning. Almost $12 million might have permeated Hamilton's narratives. He even took a plane to Hong Kong in one instance to get $5 million out of Tantoco's bank. Prosecutors thought that the account money came directly from the Philippine Treasury. Not long after, he began redecorating his house in Beverly Hills, is constructing a gigantic garage and increasing the size of his living area. The funds, they thought, contributed to the cost of Imelda's, and it didn't end there. Team even considered purchasing the allegedly to enlarge the property next door. Some people believe the home on Hamilton's estate was never truly his in the first place. It was a Marcos estate concealed in his name. But the most bizarre turn came with a Hamilton's aborted film project was supposed to create a movie on General Douglas. Initially, MacArthur intended it to be a thrilling war tale, but under pressure on the script from Imelda's circle transformed into something quite different. Distinct romantic drama concerning MacArthur's unfulfilled passion for a Hamilton claims that Filipino women was really awkward as he uttered the line, "I shall return," became a declaration of love. Communication rather than a final declaration of war. The film was never